Hey everyone, it's Mr. Souther coming at you with a lesson on Unit 3, Lesson 9. We're going to talk about finding duplicates, but what's kind of fun here is we're going to use nested for loops. So in class, I'm going to actually go over kind of part one, if you will, and do a little activity with you guys to kind of go over how these arrays work with a nested for loop, which is kind of critical to understand the coding part. So we'll call this video a part two, I guess, but I'll make a part one video later for going over the slides, but I'll get this posted now so you can look at it. And then we'll go through the code, the actual like what's happening in class when I see you again. Okay, first things first, we're going to predict. Basically what's happening here is we have pattern runner and patterns. It's always a good idea to kind of look through the code yourself and see like what is actually happening here. Here if in pattern runner, there's nothing really crazy here. It looks like we have an array called nums and it's got 2, 4, 6, 8, and that's it. So it's got those 4 elements, and we're going to print some sort of message for this object named pattern maker. This pattern maker is going to use the pattern. It's the patterns object. So let's go to patterns class. There's a print message here, and there's these for loops that I see where we have an outer and an inner. And then down here, check this out. So we have a thing called print square, and it's going to have a for loop. Oh, but there's another for loop within it. So that's kind of different. And there's something called print triangle. Again, it has a nested for loop. And then finally, we have a print array, which also has a nested for loop. So we've never seen that before until now. Okay, so I see nested for loops. It's kind of what I'll write. And then we're going to print some sort of pattern. And we'll print a pattern. All right, go. And what you're going to see here is, I should probably zoom in, my bad. Probably didn't see any of that, but there's this like countdown 1 through, or from 10 to 1, 10 to 1. And I love CS, right? And it does it 3 times. Okay, so if we move right along, let's go to the next one. So here we're going to do a little investigate and modify. And essentially what's happening here is we get the same exact thing, but what they want us to do is they want us to look at this print message method in the patterns class. Here's patterns, here's print message. And it says, what do you notice about the code here? Okay, well, what's happening is we have, let's see, this for loop here, which is nothing different. But again, they just want you to notice what's going on with these for loops, right? Specifically print message, there's this, instead of int index equals 0, we're starting with some sort of variable called outer, right? Some counter. And then outers, while outer is less than or equal to 3, keep running this thing. And it's going to print out countdown and that number outer. Okay, vice versa, or alternatively, we also have another for loop that starts at 10, counts down, and these are called decrements, right? It decreases by 1 every time you run the loop. It's going to print the inner. And then finally, it's going to say, I love CS. Okay, so if we try changing the starting value to, what does it want us to change it to? Try changing the starting value or the condition for the outer for loop. Okay, so what we're going to do here is let's go ahead and change, I don't know, do you want to change inner to 10 or outer to 2? I mean, it doesn't matter to me. But I think what I did was I just changed outer to 2 just to keep it simple. And if you run this, we see that we did a countdown from 2 to 3. So that countdown 1 is gone. Why is that? Well, we started with that. Okay, what if I change this inner to 9 instead of, or let's make it like, if I run it, let's see how the countdown works. Do you see how the countdown only does, it does the first 2 iterations, if you will, countdown 2 and countdown 3, but it starts, instead of starting from 10 and going down, it starts from 5. Okay. So kind of cool that, you know, changing the outer and the inner loops, clearly there's a count up and a count down that works simultaneously there for those. In our third one, what they want us to do is now they want us to look at the print square method, and they want us to do a little altering of it. So if I go to patterns.java and we print square, we have this double, really nested for loop, right? So if you look at the for, we got int outer equals 1, and then the other for loop has int inner equals outer, right? Or sorry, inner equals 1, my bad. Okay, so we count up from there. And then we're going to print some sort of multiplication symbol and then whatever else. Okay, so we're gonna look at the print square method in the pattern class. What do you think this method does? Well, I'm not sure, right? So let's find out what it does. It probably has something to do with printing a square, but I don't know what the square is going to look like. And then we're going to call the print square method in the pattern runner.java. And let's go ahead and just use some value. Well, remember, in this method called print square, there's this parameter called size, and it's an integer type. So when I call the method, I'm going to need to put a number in there. So how do we do that? Let's go back out here, and let's go ahead and do pattern maker dot print square. And inside the parentheses, let's give it a number, say 8. Just see what it does. So it does this countdown, and then look, it prints a 8 by 8 square. And there's all those asterisks. Okay. By the way, let's go ahead and comment out this pattern maker dot print message, just because I don't want to see it every time I run it. Clear the console. And then we're going to look at print triangle and find out what it does. Well, it's probably going to print the triangle, right? So it's going to use the same star system, and it's going to go ahead and it's using something with height for the triangle. And it's going to say, hey, run this loop when the outer is 1 and is less than or equal to height. So if I said print triangle 3, it's going to run this part of the loop 3 times and this part of the loop 3 times. Okay, so one's the outer plus plus, one's an inner plus plus. We're both starting at 1 and then working up. So let's try it out. And there's something called height as well. So let's go ahead and do another pattern maker dot print. We're doing triangle, right? And let's call it, let's also do it for 8 units just for fun. See what happens. Oh, what happened there? Did I use the wrong? Oh, I forgot the capital M. Whoopsie. My bad. Let's try that again. And voila, we have the 8 by 8 square, and we have a 8-unit tall triangle. So we start from 1 asterisk, then 2, then 3, then 4. So it counts up all the way until this, right? We're going to produce this 8 times, which matches the height of that triangle. So it's making some sort of right triangle. Okay, and then for 2D number 3, what would you need to change to make the triangle print upside down? For example, try changing the inner loop to the following. So I'm going to go to patterns.java, and it's probably hard for you to see because the text is small there. But for the print triangle, what they want me to do is instead of doing this for int inner equals 1, let's comment that out. Let's go ahead and hit enter here and go ahead and copy and paste this new code. So instead of inner equals 1, we're going to do this for int inner equals outer, and then inner is less than or equal to height, and then there's this plus plus for the inner. Okay, let's go ahead and run it. And there we go. So what happened was, in this case, int inner equals 1, we're starting from 1 and then counting up. Well, now what's happening in this part of the loop is inner is equal to outer. So outer is going to be equal to what? It starts with 1, but eventually when it runs the loop, right, it's eventually going to mean it's going to equal the height at some point. Okay. So then what's happening is we're going to go ahead and run from that part and decrease by that star. And the activity we'll do in class will actually help you understand this a little bit better than the way I'm explaining it, just kind of looking at the code. But essentially, when we switch from inner equals 1, instead of counting from 1, we're actually starting from the counter to go with outer and then keep going, right? Nothing else changed here except instead of outer here, right? We're going to go to height. So again, the activity we'll do in class will help signify this, but at least you're seeing it here with the nested for loop. The main thing is what's going to happen, just for your information right now, is when we run this print triangle, it's going to look at this first line. Okay, it's going to set the outer equal to 1. And it's going to go ahead and run the loop, right? This criteria is going to be true because the height I set is 8. Well, the outer right now in the first iteration is just a 1. Okay, we'll do this outer plus plus at the end where we add 1 to it. And then what's going to run next is, now it ran that first line correctly. Now it's going to go to this for loop and it says for int inner equals outer. So what that means is inner is now assigned a value of 1. It's equal to the outer. And while that's the case, let's go to the next part of the loop. So 1 is less than or equal to the height of 8. Then we're going to go ahead and do that, and we're going to print out this star one time. Remember, this is all on the same line, right? This is not going to a new line. It's just system.out.print. Okay. So then let's loop back again. And then now we're going to go ahead, instead of going outside back to the first loop, we're going to keep staying inside this loop and keep printing. And then when I'm done with that, then it's going to go back to the big loop, or when I'm done with that, it's going to go back to the big loop, and it's going to go ahead and go to the next line. So it's going to decrease every time because the counter for outer will get bigger, right? And so will the counter for inner. Here, the counter for inner was restricted to 1, and then we would add 1. So again, the activity, I think, will shed some more light on that. I don't know if I need to test this, probably not. Let's go ahead and finish it. Okay, for this one, let's go ahead and zoom in a bit. What it wants us to do is it wants us to look at the print array method and the print patterns class. What do you think this method does? Okay, print array is way down here. So it's going to take in some sort of array of integers. It's called numbers. And it's going to run this for loop. It's not an enhanced for loop. It is a traditional for loop we're used to looking at, where we start with index equal to 0. As long as index is less than the length of the array, then add 1 to it, and then run this line of code next. Now we're going to say this next variable is equal to index plus 1. And so long as next is smaller than the array length, then we're going to add 1 more to length, or the next, and then we're going to print this out. So we got outer numbers index. So this bracket index just means which element am I going to look at? We always start from the 0. So it's going to look at that first array. And then the same thing with this guy. But again, it's it's the same array, but it's using a different number for the element. So let's see what it prints out. Let's go ahead and call this thing. I'm going to go ahead and comment these out just because I don't want to see triangles and squares again. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do pattern maker, right? And we're going to call that print array method. And then inside the parentheses, I have to use this 1D array of nums. Okay. Now, in case you're wondering, how does Southern know that by looking at the to do? Well, you could read it here. It says you have to use the 1D array nums, but also let's go back to this print array method we were just looking at. Do you see how inside the parentheses there's a parameter? I need to put something in there to make that parameter execute. And that's right here. So we need to use that array called nums. Okay, because I had that from somewhere there's nums. They tell me to run nums. Oh, right, because it's right here. The array nums is right there. I couldn't see it. Yes, it's going to do something with 2, 4, 6, 8. So the first element, or the 0th element, is 2. So let's see what it does. Okay, so it ran the outer. So while the outer for loop is stuck on 2, the inner keeps counting up. And then once that inner loop is done, then we loop back to the outer loop and start with a next, or plus 2, which is 4, right? Or the next element, which is 4. So first element, outer is looking at 2. It's going to produce the inner loop, which starts with a 4, then a 6, then an 8. The outer loop stays the same. And then the next go around, now the outer loop gets another addition to the next element, which is 4. The inner will look at 6 and 8, last 2 digits, right? And then finally, when we run the final loop starting at 6, the inner loop has to be 8, and that's it. It'll run, finish executing there. Couple vocab words, if I'm not mistaken. Polymorphism, that's basically where we have the same object or method that has more than one form. We did that back in lesson 6. Remember, we had pet had some sort of method called speak or something. When dog has the same command or method called speak, it's going to produce a bark versus the pet will just make a sound, I think is what it says. Right, so you can go ahead and change them across different classes, even though it's the same method. Post condition, that's what happens. You have to check that must be true after the execution of a statement. So that before would be the precondition. And finally, a variable that's changed by constant value is that the control loop control variable. All right. So then the choices are relatively easy. It's not too difficult. A lot of you guys, like my children, like to play Pokemon, so I decided to go with that first. Okay, first things first, we have public class Pokemon Runner. Okay, so all this is created. I'm gonna look at the to-dos. We have several different classes, if you will, but two of them are actually just these TXT files. Okay, and there's two more Java files. So what's happening here? To-do number one in the Pokedex.java, that's where I'm at. In that class, write the check for duplicates method to return true if any Pokemon in Pokemon data have the same attack points, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I need to write this method for, there it is, check for duplicates. Before I go ahead, I'm going to go ahead and identify that the data type is a Boolean. So my return will be true or false. So that's it. So it's not going to be a number. It's not going to be text. Okay, so let's get going here. What I'm going to do here, whoops, is to get started, let's say I'm really stuck. So I'm going to use some sort of nested loops. So in my mind, I'm thinking, well, we need some sort of for loop, right? And then there's going to be another for loop in here. So that's going to happen. I'm going to go ahead and start with that. These are not anything crazy. We're going to traverse the 1D array of Pokemon data and the get attack method in the Pokemon class to check if there are duplicate attack points. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to do the same outer and inner thing because we're going to use nested loops. But before I go ahead, let's say I'm kind of stuck. Well, don't forget, a lot of times in these instructions, there's the need help with your algorithm, and there's all this kind of written in here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that here just to kind of help me out, right? And let's go ahead and comment it out. That way I know not to mess with that. So that's kind of my guide, right? I can't copy it word for word. But here's the first part. It says loop from 0 to Pokemon data dot length. Well, that tells me that, hey, we can do this int, and let's use an outer loop and an inner loop. So I'm going to use the word outer to denote that, hey, this part of the for loop is the outer loop. And you'll see in class when we do the activity that it does run differently. So the outer loop executes the first time it goes, and then the inner loop keeps executing till it can't. And when the inner loop is terminated, then it goes back to the outer loop. So we're going to start with outer is equal to 0, and then while that outer loop is less than or equal to the name of the array, which is what? Is it attack data? Is that what we're going with? Where is my, oh, sorry, it's in Pokemon.java. We have string attack. I missed it somewhere. Hold on. Oh, here it is, Pokemon data. That's what we want to use. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and bring that down here. So it's going to be that array length. So while my outer number is smaller or equal to the length of the array called Pokemon data created there, we're going to keep moving on with the outer. So for my inner loop, let's go ahead and do int inner, right, equals 0, because we're going to count up from there. We're going to keep checking that the inner is less than or equal to the outer loop, right? In which case, if that were true, then keep going with the inner loop. All right. So then finally, what it wants us to do is do this if statement. I think they just give it to us word for word, don't they? So if I copy and paste this if Pokemon data outer, so that means for every iteration of that get attack, right? I think I need parentheses here if I'm not mistaken. There we go. If that's true, then finally we can go ahead and return true. Okay, so in other words, when this get attack is equal to the inner, so basically what's happening is Pokemon data, that's looking at this array here, right, from the Pokemon class. And if you want to know where is this Pokemon data coming from, it's coming from the names file and the attack file. So here's names. Like for one, we have Bulbasaur, right? And then for attacks, the corresponding attack level is 49. So that's what's happening here. So it's going to compile that array of those two objects. So when I look at element number 0, the first element is going to be Bulbasaur. 49 is what's going to be produced. Okay. So for my if statement, wherever it went, it's saying that, hey, if element number 0 for get attack is equivalent to the inner loops get attack, then we're going to say, yeah, there's a duplicate. Okay. If that's not the case, then I'm going to go look at the next element is what's happening. Okay, so again, the Pokemon data has an outer number or index number, and then we have the inner number there. Okay, and that's what it's telling us to do. This is how you're going to check to find whether there are duplicates, right? So what we're trying to do, in case you're wondering, is let's look at the attacks. Are there any attack numbers that are the same? So I see 49, 62, right? So I'm just trying to see, are there any duplicates for the attacks? Right here, do you see how 56 pops up twice? I think I saw 90 earlier on, 60 is here, 60 is here. So it's trying to find out, are there any duplicates? Okay. All right. So then I just think I just need to call this, right? 2D number 2, let's go ahead and call it. So we have an object called Pokemon. So let's go ahead and do Pokemon dot what is the name of the thing? Check for duplicates. And then do you see how that's the method we're going to run? Do you see how it wants us to specifically print the result? That means I need to do a system dot out dot print ln of that to produce. Okay, otherwise it won't print it. Run it. And we got an error. What's going on? Oh, I wrote enter with a T. My bad. It should be with an N. Where is it? Oh, there we go. Now it should run correctly. And there you go. So do you see how it gives me, what is it giving me here? There's a lot going on. I think I printed too much. Let me go to Pokemon Runner. Let's not go ahead and print that Pokemon. Let's go ahead and print the actual check for duplicates. Do you see how it says true? So that means if there are, well, actually, let me show you both just so I can kind of make the point here. Let me clear the console and run it. So check it out. These are the list of, this is what's happening here is it's doing this number 5, line number 5, system.out.println. So it's printing the Pokemon object. Pokemon object is going to use the Pokedex array of objects to get the names.txt and attacks.txt. Okay, so if you look at this, do you see how, what were the numbers I said? 60 pops up a couple times, right? Right there, 60. Somewhere else, there's a 60. Right, so Spearow and Pidgeotto both have 60. So does Ekans, right? Versus Raichu and something else has a score of 90. Sandslash and Alolan Sandslash have the same. So when I run this last thing, the check for duplicates is saying, hey, are there actually duplicates? Any? If so, right, true. And here you can see Diglett and Diglett have the same attack power, right? So that's that. So we successfully checked for that. So the moral of the story here is you need to learn how to write nested for loops because that's how you're going to traverse through the arrays to be able to check. So remember what's happening here, and you'll see in the activity, is Java's kind of dumb, right? We have to be very specific with what we're doing. So what's happening is if you just use a single for loop, you cannot check that these attack values are the same. It's just not possible. The only thing a for loop can do is just keep reading these numbers, right? It's going to go one by one pair by one pair. So that's not going to help. So then what we do is we do essentially a nested for loop so that one for loop is producing these numbers. The other one is producing these numbers as well, starting from a different number, okay? So in other words, the outer for loop starts with 49, and it's going to park itself there. So let's go ahead and write this down. So outer for loop starts here. Okay. And then what's going to happen is the inner for loop, for example, you want it to start here. Okay. So what's going to happen is the first iteration is going to see, hey, is 49 equal to 62? No. Okay. So the only thing that's going to move is the inner loop. So then inner for loop moves here. Right. It's going to look here next. So it's kind of the first move. This is the second move, right? And then third move for inner is going to look three here, right? So then it's going to keep looking one on. So outer's stuck here. That is locked in. If I can highlight that, I would. And the inner loop's going to say, okay, let's look at 62. Okay, is 62 equal to 49? No. Moving on, loop again. Is 82 equal to 49? No. Loop again. Is 100 equal to 49? Nope. Loop again. It's going to keep going, keep going, keep going. And then once it's done looking through all that, comparing to 49, then the outer loop is going to move to here, 62. And then it's going to look at all the other numbers. Is 62 the same as 82? No. Is 62 the same as 100? No. Is 62 the same as 52? It's going to keep looping. So that's how you need to check. So you do need a nested for loop to check for duplicates and things like that. So I hope this helps. And again, the activity will shed more light as well. But have a good one.